Hi there, welcome back to Haunting Veils. Today we are going to talk about famous TikToker who was murdered during livestream. To know how was she murdered and who murdered her, watch the video till end. Valeria Márquez never expected to become a cautionary tale. In fact, for most of her young adult life, she was the one inspiring others. How to contour the perfect cheekbone, how to build a brand from the ground up, how to smile confidently into a lens and make thousands of strangers feel like they knew you. She was not a celebrity in the traditional sense. She hadn't starred in films, sung on stages, or walked red carpets. But in the age of social media, she was something even more accessible, an influencer, a beauty entrepreneur, a symbol of modern hustle. She was born in Guadalajara, Mexico, and spent her teenage years studying hard, dreaming of becoming something meaningful, something more. At first, it was dentistry, a respectable path. She was bright and driven and practical, but her heart leaned towards something more creative, more expressive, more visible. So she traded scalpels for lip liners and textbooks for palettes. What began as casual posts evolved quickly into a brand. Her tutorials gained traction, her personality shined. And soon Valeria was no longer just another girl online. She was a name, a style, a brand. She opened her salon, blossomed the beauty lounge, and everything seemed to fall into place. With her fresh aesthetic and business sense, she drew in clients, friends, and followers. Her TikTok grew rapidly, then her Instagram, and soon she had more than 300,000 people watching her every move. But none of them, not one, could have imagined what they would witness on May 13th, 2025. That day began like any other. Valeria arrived at the salon, posted her usual check-in photo, and prepared for her live stream. Her days were consistent, predictable, and beautifully curated. She had a formula: lighting, camera angle, soft music, gentle voice, beauty tips. She talked directly to the viewer, made them feel seen, as if they were sitting across from her instead of watching through a screen. That intimacy was her charm, and perhaps, unknowingly, her danger. Because what Valeria never considered, or maybe considered too late, was how easy it had become for someone to know her every move. Every detail of her routine was visible to anyone paying close attention. When she was live, when she was alone, when she laughed, and when her guard was down. That afternoon, something strange happened. Two men showed up at the salon while Valeria was away. One of them wore a delivery uniform. The other waited on a motorcycle outside, helmet still on. They dropped off a Starbucks drink and a box wrapped in shiny paper. The box had no name, no card, just the weight of expectation. When Valeria returned and was told about the delivery, she seemed puzzled. On her live stream, she held a pink stuffed pig and joked about the gift. "Maybe they're going to kill me," she laughed, brushing off the oddity with the same ease she used to apply highlighter. It was meant to be funny. But now, that line hangs like smoke over everything that came after. She had gone live from the same seat many times before. Behind her were shelves of products, a large round mirror, and ring lights that gave her that perfect glow. That night, she was casual, cheerful, and seemed in good spirits. There was no sign that anything was wrong. But somewhere behind her calm expression was a flicker, a hesitation. Maybe it was the gift. Maybe it was something she hadn't said. Yet, she clutched the stuffed pig as she spoke to her viewers, mentioned the strange gift, and said that someone would be coming by the salon soon. Her voice was light, but there was something in her eyes, a slight tightness, a glance toward the door. Then it happened. Off-screen, a voice called out, "Hey, Vale." Her smile faltered. She replied, "Yes," then muted her microphone. What followed was nothing but silence, and then the unmistakable sound of gunfire. 3 shots. The live stream kept rolling. On camera, Valeria jerked violently, clutching her chest and abdomen. She stumbled out of frame. There was no scream, no final word, just a blur of movement and a loud, panicked voice of another woman entering the room before the feed abruptly ended. Across TikTok, thousands of followers froze in disbelief. The comments rolled in quickly. Was it fake? Was it staged? Was it part of a performance? But as minutes passed and Valeria didn't return, the confusion turned to panic. Within hours, news broke that Valeria Márquez had been murdered. Not just murdered, assassinated during a live stream. Police arrived at the salon and found her body behind the counter. Her phone, still on the tripod, had recorded everything. Her pink pig sat on the chair where she had just been moments earlier. The Starbucks drink was still unopened. The gift box untouched. There was no sign of struggle, no attempt at robbery, no chaos, just precision. Whoever came for Valeria didn't want to scare her. They didn't want a scene. They wanted her dead, and they wanted the world to watch. The Jalisco prosecutor's office labeled it a femicide, a term in Mexico that carries weight beyond murder. It meant Valeria's death was not just a crime, but a statement, a killing motivated by gender, visibility, and targeted violence. Valeria's fans erupted. Hashtags like hashtag Justice for Valeria and hashtag No Más Violencia spread across platforms. Her DMs were flooded with broken-hearted messages. Her last post, an image of her smiling with soft pink lips, was suddenly transformed into a digital memorial. But while her fans grieved, investigators began combing through the details. Why her? Who would do this? It wasn't a robbery. Her phone, her cash register, her equipment, none of it was touched. This was personal. Someone had watched her, waited, planned. Surveillance footage confirmed 2 men arrived before the killing, one as the fake delivery man, the other standing watch. Eyewitnesses said they didn't seem nervous. They were methodical, practiced. Police began interviewing employees, friends, past clients. There was no shortage of rumors. Some claimed it was a jealous ex. Others speculated it was a rival influencer, someone who envied her success. But slowly, pieces began to emerge that suggested something even darker. Behind Valeria's perfect posts and curated content was a quieter story, a private conflict, rarely spoken of publicly, but known to those closest to her. There had been tension with her family, specifically her mother. It was never splashed across her page. Valeria had learned, as many influencers do, to separate her private pain from her public image. But offline, there had been fights, estrangement, accusations of betrayal, financial manipulation. Friends whispered about it in hushed tones, how Valeria had tried to cut ties, how she had accused her mother of exploiting her success, of attempting to control her business and money. She had stopped posting family photos years ago. She never tagged relatives, never brought them on live streams. It was her silent boundary. But boundaries can breed resentment. And someone, somewhere, hadn't respected hers. The funeral, the tension was palpable. The room was filled with mourners, friends, influencers, clients, classmates. Some cried. Some stared in numb disbelief. Her casket was surrounded by flowers, and in front of it, someone had placed the pink pig from the live stream. But what was missing, some said, was grief from the people closest to her bloodline. There were murmurs, not shouted but whispered. Why hadn't they warned her? Why weren't they devastated? Why were they silent? Police reportedly requested statements from family members, and while no official suspect had been named yet, their investigation was beginning to shift focus. It wasn't just about the shooters, it was about who sent them. Online forums exploded. Reddit threads charted her final livestream frame by frame. TikTokers posted tributes and theory breakdowns. News outlets in Mexico and beyond began airing exposés, diving into the dangerous reality of being a woman online in a country battling epidemic levels of gender-based violence. But for those who knew Valeria personally, the loss went deeper than politics or headlines. She was warm. She was funny. She remembered birthdays. She left voice notes instead of texts. She helped aspiring makeup artists get started. She believed in the power of reinvention, and she lived like every day could be a new chapter. But that night, her story was ripped from the page. And the world, her fans, her friends, even her critics, were left to wonder, who hated her enough to do this? And what had been boiling beneath the surface that no one dared to say out loud? As authorities pulled apart the timeline, a new thread began to emerge, one not driven by random violence or petty rivalry, but by deeper wounds festering in the shadows of Valeria's personal life. Behind the camera, behind the followers, behind the salon that shimmered with soft light and curated perfection, was a fractured family with secrets no filter could hide. Valeria's strained relationship with her mother wasn't a mystery to those closest to her. It was a quiet truth, whispered in trusted circles, never shared online. She had once confided in a friend that money was the root of everything wrong, that every peso she earned through her influencer work, every sponsorship she landed, every beauty product she launched, somehow became a negotiation. That her success, instead of being celebrated at home, was met with control, pressure, and entitlement. She didn't say much, but what she did share painted a picture of a young woman desperately trying to reclaim her identity from the very person who gave her life. A friend remembered how, even when Valeria started her salon, there were tense conversations behind the scenes about ownership, investments, and who really deserved credit. Valeria insisted she did it alone. Her mother allegedly insisted otherwise. What began as subtle disagreements turned into verbal fights, and what was once love became something colder, transactional, sharp, and eventually dangerous that it wasn't. Until detectives reviewed Valeria's private messages and business emails that the gravity of the situation fully came into view. There were messages of confrontation, threats disguised as concern, demands hidden behind passive-aggressive wording, and slowly, a name that had been in the background started to appear more frequently. Her mother, not in the way most would expect, not openly malicious, not in rants or public posts, but in coded language, bank transfers, traces of a power struggle that went from emotional to financial to something more. Investigators learned that just weeks before Valeria's death, she had moved her business accounts out of shared access. She had revoked certain permissions. She had started drawing hard lines, legal lines. And with those lines came escalation. According to one source close to the investigation, Valeria had allegedly told a friend that if anything happened to her, she had cut the wrong person off. At the time, it sounded paranoid. But now, in the aftermath of her murder, it sounded like foresight. Police turned their attention to the phone records. The salon's cameras had caught the masked delivery man entering with the package. But what about the person who ordered the hit? In interviews with those who knew the family, a story began to surface, one of manipulation, resentment, and control. Valeria's mother had once played a central role in her career. She helped her with her early content, reportedly even managed some of her branding. But as Valeria's fame grew, the dynamic changed. She no longer needed managing. She no longer accepted unsolicited advice. And most critically, she no longer funneled her earnings into accounts they both shared. This independence, which should have been a triumph, became a threat. Friends said the tension reached a peak after Valeria refused to allow her mother access to the new branch of her salon. That decision, seemingly business-related, ignited something volatile in private. Valeria began to distance herself. She stopped answering certain calls. She declined family invitations. She focused on her career. But something else happened, too. She started looking over her shoulder. She made offhand remarks to friends about people knowing too much about her schedule. She asked her assistant to double-lock the back door. She even told a friend that someone had been parked outside the salon for 2 days straight. All of it felt like pieces of a larger puzzle that hadn't taken shape yet. And then, the final pieces dropped. Police discovered that the phone used to coordinate the delivery was linked to a third party, an unregistered prepaid number. But surveillance footage showed the delivery man speaking to someone over the phone before entering the salon. That voice, once cleaned up by forensic audio specialists, was traced to someone connected not directly to the murderers, but to someone inside Valeria's family circle. An older woman's voice, not yelling, just directing, confirming she was there, telling them to proceed. It wasn't evidence that could convict, not yet, but it was enough to raise suspicion to a terrifying level. As this information surfaced, the public narrative began to shift. What began as a random act of violence now looked like a calculated hit, a message, a form of punishment for disobedience. In a country plagued by femicide and targeted killings of women, Valeria's case became a tragic mirror of larger, systemic issues. But for those close to her, it wasn't about statistics. It was about betrayal, about a young woman who did everything right, built a business, protected her peace, set boundaries, and was killed for it. Her former assistant broke down during questioning, recalling the day Valeria nervously checked the front door 3 times. Her cousin recalled a conversation days before the murder where Valeria said she felt like someone wanted to end her. And yet, in the hours leading up to her death, she still went live. She still smiled. She still held that pig and joked about an expensive gift, never knowing that it would become a symbol of her last breath. When police brought in her mother for questioning, she reportedly denied everything, said she hadn't spoken to Valeria in weeks, that she didn't know about any package, that she had no idea who would want to hurt her daughter. But her demeanor, as described by one officer, was oddly calm. There were no tears, no outbursts, just a quiet, mechanical sadness that didn't quite fit the gravity of what had occurred. Her phone was taken, her financial records subpoenaed, and although she hadn't yet been charged, the investigation began to orbit her like a slow-moving storm. Meanwhile, the killers remained unnamed, unseen, hidden behind helmets and blurred security footage. But it was the voice, the one on the phone, the one that said she was there, that remained the most haunting lead. Police continued to compare that voice to known samples, to recordings from past business calls, to voicemails, and each time, they got closer, not to a stranger, but to someone Valeria once trusted. As the investigation intensified, the media latched onto the story with renewed force. True crime podcasts covered it. News anchors debated it. Commentators argued over whether this was a case of generational trauma, of financial greed, or of cold-blooded revenge. But to those who loved Valeria, it was simpler. She had wanted her life back. She had wanted control. She had drawn a line in the sand. And someone who had once crossed every line with impunity decided she couldn't be allowed to succeed without consequence. Her salon became a shrine. Flowers piled at the entrance. Fans lit candles and left notes. Her pink pig, once a prop, was now a memorial. And the screen that had once brought her fame had now burned her image into the minds of viewers around the world, not as a teacher, not as a trendsetter, but as a victim. The gift that had arrived before her death was examined by authorities. Inside, they found nothing dangerous, just a stuffed toy, a bottle of perfume, and a small card with no name. But it wasn't the contents that mattered. It was the message. I see you. I'm close. And soon, you'll be gone. As weeks passed, the pressure on the investigation mounted. Advocacy groups demanded arrests. Fans demanded transparency, and Valeria's family remained strangely quiet. No public pleas for justice, no interviews, no statements of outrage, just silence. Investigators believed that the motive had finally emerged in full: control, jealousy, money. The killers may have been hired hands, but the reason? That came from the heart of her own family, a rift that had gone from emotional to legal, and from legal to lethal. And so, the image of Valeria smiling on camera with her pink pig became something heavier, something harder to look at. A moment frozen in time just before a life was stolen. And as the second part of the investigation moved forward, detectives prepared for what would come next. Interviews, phone logs, voice confirmations, and the one question that still hadn't been answered: who really gave the order? The killers had vanished, leaving behind a scene so precise and clean that even seasoned investigators were unsettled. But what remained was a voice, faint but traceable, and the weight of a motive tied to resentment and power. The first to be called in for questioning were Valeria's close friends and salon staff, people who knew her patterns, fears, and who she confided in during her final weeks. Her assistant, pale and shaking, recounted how Valeria had changed in the last month, less trusting, more cautious. She said Valeria had confided that someone had been watching her from a distance, that she'd noticed the same car circling her block at night, that a woman had once come into the salon asking strange questions, pretending to be a client, but clearly fishing for her schedule. When asked if Valeria had named anyone she was afraid of, the assistant hesitated, then whispered one name: her mother. The room went quiet. The investigator didn't press her. Not yet. But the weight of that name lingered as the assistant broke down, apologizing through tears, saying she wished she'd done more, said more, believed her sooner. Other interviews echoed the same tension. A former friend of Valeria's, who had fallen out with her the year before, described how she had tried to warn Valeria to cut ties before it was too late. She claimed Valeria had been living in fear of her own success, that the more she rose, the more threatened people around her became. One salon client recalled overhearing a heated phone call between Valeria and a woman she only identified as Mama. The argument, muffled but intense, centered on money: who controlled it, who deserved it, and who was being ungrateful. The client remembered Valeria's face turning pale as she ended the call. That same day, she reportedly changed the locks on the salon. Another employee confirmed that Valeria had recently hired a digital security consultant to review her phone and social media for signs of hacking. The consultant, when questioned, revealed that Valeria had suspected someone was tracking her, not just online, but physically. GPS interference, mirrored accounts, password resets she hadn't requested. It was subtle, but consistent. She hadn't gone to the police, not wanting to escalate things. But she had made a note in her phone: if anything happens to me, it's not random. That note, discovered in her cloud backup, was timestamped 5 days before she died. Detectives also began piecing together the voice from the call made just before the murder. Forensic analysis was underway, comparing the voice to known samples from her inner circle. It was an older woman, the cadence distinct, the instructions calm but firm. In the meantime, a new witness came forward, a neighbor who lived near the salon. She had seen the two men in the alley behind the shop hours before the murder. One of them was on the phone, pacing, while the other kept watch. She couldn't hear the entire conversation, but she remembered a detail that would stick in her mind forever. The man referred to the woman on the phone as jefa, Spanish for boss. Not la señora, not la madre. Jefa. It was a clue, a suggestion that whoever gave the order had authority, perhaps hired them, or perhaps had a deeper role in the organization of what happened. Investigators traced the prepaid phone used in the call to a small electronics shop 2 towns over. The purchase was made in cash by a woman wearing a surgical mask and large sunglasses. Surveillance footage captured her, but the image was blurry. Still, the height, build, and walk began drawing comparisons among the investigative team. Parallel to the police work, journalists began digging. One reporter from a Guadalajara outlet tracked down former acquaintances of the family who painted a more complex picture. According to them, Valeria's relationship with her mother had always been intense, loving but possessive, proud but critical. One person described her mother as a woman who believed Valeria owed her everything. She had helped her get started, yes, but she couldn't let go. Another acquaintance, a retired teacher, recalled seeing them argue outside a local restaurant. Months before the murder, Valeria stormed out crying. Her mother followed a few steps behind, visibly angry, yelling about being cut off and left behind. These details, once inconsequential, were now being reevaluated as pieces in a chilling mosaic. Another salon employee recounted how, just a week before her death, Valeria had called her into the back office and asked her to memorize the security system's panic code. Just in case, she had said. Just in case someone comes in that. Shouldn't. The employee thought she was overreacting, but agreed. Now she couldn't sleep, wondering if she could have stopped what happened. The investigation gained momentum when a whistleblower from a small financial firm came forward. Valeria's mother, it turned out, had been quietly funneling money from a shared account, an account Valeria had believed she'd locked down. But her mother had retained access through an old authorization code and had been draining funds steadily over the last 6 months. When Valeria discovered it, she confronted her in private, according to text messages pulled from her cloud. The messages were sharp, filled with betrayal. Valeria accused her of stealing. Her mother replied coldly, "You wouldn't have anything without me." The next day, Valeria called her lawyer. She began proceedings to officially sever all financial ties. That was 3 weeks before her murder. The tension was now no longer abstract. It had paperwork. It had timestamps. And it had motived. As more interviews were conducted, the name of one of the 2 masked men began to emerge, someone with a criminal past, tied to small-time enforcements, extortion, and intimidation jobs. He had once served time for threatening a debt collector and was known in underground circles as someone who took cash for silence. His last known residence was one town over from Valeria's family home. Investigators believed he had been recruited, not personally connected to Valeria, but hired. And if he was hired, then someone paid him. That someone had yet to be identified. But the financial records were being pulled apart now, with a focus on transfers made in the week before her death. What they found was a transfer of 8,500 pesos to an unmarked account. Small, but unusual. It came from an account in the name of a shell company, one that had been opened by someone using a stolen ID. But when traced, the shell company had one phone number listed on its creation form. And that number was a landline belonging to Valeria's mother's previous residence. The connection was circumstantial, but mounting. And while no arrest had been made yet, the investigators were circling, waiting for one more piece to fall into place. The interviews continued. A former family friend recalled Valeria once confiding in her that power changes people, and that success makes family forget you're human. She said it in jest, but with tired eyes. She had been carrying the weight of her own success like a curse, knowing it had brought her independence, but also enemies, ones that looked like kin. Even among the fans online, the conversation shifted. No longer was the horror simply about the live stream. It became about the trust that kills, the blood ties that sour, the unbearable idea that the person you fear most might be the one who once tucked you into bed, who stood behind your first selfie, who smiled at your first paycheck. Public opinion remained divided. Some refused to believe a mother could be capable of that level of cruelty. Others, especially women who had survived toxic families and power-hungry parents, saw the signs clearly. They commented under Valeria's last videos. "We failed her. She deserved better," she knew. The investigators moved carefully, quietly, knowing that the next step, confronting the woman who had become their prime suspect, would either confirm everything or unravel what they had built. But still, the voice on the phone haunted them. The phone call where someone said, "She's there now. Go in." Calm, measured, like placing an order, like it wasn't a life at all, but a barrier to be removed. In the end, it would be that voice that either made or broke the case. And somewhere, someone was waiting for the knock at their door. But justice, like secrets, always arrives eventually. especially when the world is already watching. The investigators had traced the voice, the bank transfer, and the burner phone. All threads that once fluttered in separate winds were now being braided into a noose. The surveillance footage, though blurry, was enhanced by specialists who slowed it frame by frame, analyzing height, posture, the distinctive limp of one of the shooters, details that, when matched against criminal records and eyewitness accounts, began to narrow the search. But it was the voice on that call, faint, controlled, confident, that sealed the suspicion. Forensics concluded with high confidence that it matched other recordings submitted anonymously by someone who had once worked with Valeria's mother. That someone, a former accountant, came forward not out of guilt, but fear. She claimed that weeks before the murder, she overheard a phone conversation in which Valeria's mother allegedly asked someone, "How soon can you make this happen?" The woman didn't think much of it until the live stream, until the news broke, until Valeria's face was plastered across every screen in Mexico. That memory, that phrase, returned like a curse, and she couldn't keep it to herself anymore. Her testimony cracked the final wall. Combined with financial records, the prepaid phone, the footage, and the voice match, prosecutors moved to secure an arrest warrant. On a quiet Tuesday morning, less than 6 weeks after Valeria's murder, the knock came. Her mother opened the door calmly, dressed in black, as if mourning something lost. She was taken into custody without resistance, charged with conspiracy to commit murder and femicide. The reaction online was nuclear. For many, it confirmed what had felt true from the beginning, that the horror wasn't in the bullets, but in the betrayal. That death didn't come from a stranger's gun, but from a mother's resentment. In her first hearing, her mother pleaded not guilty. Her lawyer claimed the evidence was circumstantial, that the voice was misidentified, that she loved her daughter and had nothing to do with her death. But the courtroom was thick with tension. Family members refused to make eye contact. Valeria's friends wept quietly, and fans stood outside, holding signs that read, "She deserved better. Say her name, and justice for Valeria." The trial, still ongoing, has already revealed layers of manipulation, deceit, and emotional abuse that extended far beyond the surface. But no verdict, no sentence, no public outcry can rewind the final seconds of that live stream. What we saw that night wasn't just a crime, it was a reality check. That sometimes the people closest to you aren't the ones who lift you higher, but the ones who clip your wings when you finally start to fly. Valeria Márquez was bright, talented, and rising. She built everything with her own hands. And in the end, she was destroyed by the one who helped her take her first steps. It's a tragedy that stretches beyond influencers or Mexico. It's a mirror held up to every toxic relationship hidden under the mask of family. A warning that success doesn't just attract fans, it also exposes enemies, even the ones with your last name. If you watched this far, don't let her story be another headline that fades away. Share it. Talk about it. Remember her name. Because Valeria's light was stolen on camera, but what happens next, that's up to us. If you want more real cases like this, explained in depth with no fluff and nothing held back, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. There are more stories like Valeria's, hidden, buried, nearly forgotten. Let's make sure they're never silenced again.